I'm going to walk you through the process of digitizing your VHS tapes or 8mm tapes or other analog tapes. And this tutorial relies heavily on the expert advice at DigitalFAQ.com forum. And I've transferred all my family home movies using this method. So this video is split up into chapters so you can rewatch parts. And there are 3 parts. The first part is picking the hardware. Second is doing the transfer. And the third is enhancing the video. So there are 4 methods that you can transfer VHS tapes to a digital file. The easiest way, frankly, is to get one of these VHS to DVD recorders, the one that has a VHS player on one side, DVD recorder on the other side. You put in the VHS tape, you press record onto a blank DVD disc, and it makes a copy. The problem with that is that I know we think of DVDs as being like a higher resolution and they're clearer than VHS back in the day, but it actually is going to take a not great VHS copy because most VHS tapes aren't, great compared to stuff today. And it's actually going to not improve it at all. That it actually may make it worse in the sense that what you're left with is an MPEG-2 file on that DVD disc that is going to be very hard to enhance later on. And we're going to be talking about some of the enhancement techniques to improve it. Because what I'm thinking of is that what you want to do is probably get this video not onto a DVD. You probably want to get this into a digital file, like an MP4 file, something like that, that you can upload to YouTube or that you can share with your friends. And so you don't need it to be on a DVD disc at the end. The second way, and this is actually quite common on YouTube, there's a lot of videos showing you how to use an HD upscaler, like the one you see in the picture, in order to take a VHS feed, upscale it through one of these devices. It digitizes it at the same time. You then have to get it into your computer with some kind of capture device, like the Elgato Camlink, for example, and then you save it using OBS or something. So this is a common technique. I actually, when I first started doing this a couple of years ago, when I got back into this, I tried that because that was the equipment I sort of had on hand, and it was okay, like it's better than nothing, but there are better ways. The third way is HVHS player to a capture device. That's the one we're going to be talking about today. And the fourth way that you can transfer your video is with what's called the VHS Decode project. It's really interesting, but it's also very technically challenging, I think, for most people. The way it works is that you would have to adapt using maybe even some soldering tools and so on, your VHS player. The good news is you can use a regular VHS player that has one of these taps inside. You can see it on top of the tape head. And you get the RF signal out of the tape head directly without going through the regular Composite or S-Video ports. This is supposed to give you potentially a better signal because you've removed one of the places where maybe the signal could degrade. But then you have to do a lot of work on the computer, and there's some scripts and so on in order to get the video ready into a final output. But the proponents say that it is as good as using the best hardware equipment that's available today, like the time-based corrector that we're going to be talking about in this video. It's not for everybody. I don't even know if it's for me because it's a big learning curve to get this up and running, I think. I am very interested in it because I like this type of stuff. But for now, I'm only going to recommend the third method, and that's going to be what I'm going to talk about in the rest of this video. Let's start with picking the hardware. The point of picking the right hardware is to avoid 3 common problems. Problem number 1 is tearing or flagging, and this is what it looks like. If you follow the correct method, then you won't have this problem. Problem number 2 is the audio being out of sync with the video. That's a common problem unless you get the necessary equipment. And problem number 3 is crushed contrast or crushed blacks. What this means is that the dark areas of the video are too dark and detail is lost. And again, if you get the right equipment, this won't happen. To transfer analog video from a tape, you need a tape player and an analog to digital capture device. You'll also need another piece of hardware called a frame time-based corrector, but because those are rare and very expensive, there's an acceptable alternative that we'll talk about. So let's start with the tape player, which is also known as a VCR, which is also known as a VHS player or SVHS player. Now, there are 3 categories of tape players, and they'll play all your VHS tapes, but some will do it better than others. The first and best is the SVHS player with what's called a line time-based corrector, or Line TBC. These are the most rare players and the most expensive players. You can find a list of the recommended SVHS players with Line TBC at the DigitalFAQ forum, and there's also a link in the description. Now, what's so special about an SVHS player with a Line TBC feature? Well, it takes a video that looks like the one on the left, which is played with a regular VHS player, and it makes it look like the one on the right. Now, here's another example. Again, on the left is a regular SVHS player, which isn't as bad as a VHS player as in the other example, but it's still not as good as the one on the right. Anyway, that's why experts recommend an SVHS player with the Line TBC feature. But these are hard to find, so if you want to get started, then find a standard SVHS player from JVC or Panasonic. Now, regular SVHS players are better than regular VHS players for the following reason, is they have the ability to output the video signal via an S-video cable. VHS players can't do that. Now, the experts say this is important because an S-video cable sends the contrast and the color signals separately, whereas the composite cable sends them both together. Another reason might be that SVHS players may have better parts inside because they were a little bit more expensive to begin with. So it's possible that even if there's no market improvement between the composite cable and the S-video cable, maybe there's something in an SVHS player inside that is slightly better than a regular VHS player. But the bottom line is that regular SVHS players are common enough that you should be able to find one fairly quickly. But of course, VHS players are more common. By the way, keep in mind that all this talk about which hardware is better or worse is based on when this equipment was new. So what that means is maybe a $500 SVHS player with Line TBC that was used 8 hours a day for 10 years, maybe at a TV studio or something. Maybe now it has weird problems, whereas the regular SVHS player that was maybe used in somebody's house for an hour or two a week, maybe it has fewer problems. I bought all my equipment from eBay or Facebook Marketplace or thrift stores. And if you're serious about this hobby, or if it's going to be a business, then consider buying your gear from DigitalFAQ. They restore hardware and they test it, so I would have a lot more confidence in them than on some eBay listing. Unless you have $500 or $1,000 to spend on an SVHS player with Line TBC, or unless you get really lucky on Facebook Marketplace, a thrift store, an estate sale, a church bazaar, then you'll likely get a regular SVHS player. But here's the good news. You can add a Panasonic ES-10 or ES-15 into your workflow to get all the benefits from one of those expensive SVHS players with Line TBC. You simply connect the SVHS player with an S-video cable to the ES-10 or the ES-15, and then you connect the ES-10 or ES-15 to your capture card. The ES-10 or 15 will fix that tearing or flagging thing we saw earlier. In fact, it does it better than an SVHS player with Line TBC. It also, I think, helps keep the audio and video in sync, which is something that an SVHS player with Line TBC can't do in and of itself. But the problem with these Panasonic ES-10 or 15s is that it adds what's called posterization, which is a color palette compression. Basically, it makes the colors look more drab and washed out. So going back to our three options, let's update it. Option one is the hard to find and rather expensive SVHS player with a Line TBC. Option two is the combination of a regular SVHS player and a Panasonic ES-10 or ES-15. And option three is a VHS player. But if you're watching this video and you have a lot of videos to convert, you know what, just forget that option. Try to find yourself an SVHS player. So let's go back to the list of issues that you can face when doing this. If you get a regular SVHS player and you combine it with an ES-10 or 15, then you will have solved two of those first two issues. What about the crushed contrast? How do you avoid that problem? Well, let's go back to the slide at the beginning about what hardware to get. The third issue can be solved with the correct capture device. Now, to keep things simple, I'm proposing one of these 4 options. At the top left is a capture card. This is a device that connects to your computer motherboard. And this is the option I eventually landed on, and I was lucky to find one of the ATI All-in-Wonder capture cards that I was looking for. I then bought a new old motherboard, and I built a 15-year-old computer. I got the correct motherboard, the CPU, the RAM. It was a fun project, but if this is not for you, then you can simply try to find an old computer for sale that either has Windows XP already installed, or else a computer that Windows XP could have been installed onto back in the day. Now, whether you build your Windows XP computer from scratch or you buy one, I strongly recommend that you install a second hard drive. When capturing video, you risk dropped frames if you capture on the hard drive that is running the operating system. Also, don't connect it to the internet or even your local network. Try to use this computer as a dedicated appliance that does only one thing: capture videos. By the way, Windows XP is not available for sale by Microsoft anymore, so that makes building a Windows XP machine more challenging unless you have the DVD disk already. There's a version of Windows XP available online called Windows XP Integral Edition. I cannot ask you to download it. I cannot ask you to install it, even if it works perfectly. But remember, there are no longer any security updates for Windows XP, regardless of which version of XP you use. Since you hopefully won't be connecting it to the internet, then the whole security issue isn't really an issue anymore. If you opt for the final recommendation, the Diamond VC500, then you can use your existing Windows 10 computer. Okay, so far we've covered the tape player and the capture device. Now let's talk about the frame time-based corrector, or frame TBC. The DataVideo TBC 1000 and a few other ones from DataVideo are the most sought-after hardware item for this. Now, these are really hard to find. These are really expensive. This frame TBC is different from the SVHS player's Line TBC. And frankly, I still struggle to understand it all. It has to do with image quality. It has to do with audio-video synchronization. But all I can tell you is that the people who are serious about this want one, have one, try to find one, and it helps improve the image quality. It helps keep the audio and video in sync. Now, assuming you're not going to find one of these, then there is an alternative. So earlier I mentioned that the Panasonic ES-10 and the ES-15 also improved the image and also kept, I think, the audio and video in sync, but it posterized the video image. So that's why a dedicated frame time-based corrector is the best choice. There are less costly alternatives to the TBC 1000. However, the experts at DigitalFAQ call these weak time-based correctors. And as far as I understand it, they need a stable video signal. So in other words, they work best if you have a line TBC delivering to them the video. So these other devices, these weak TBCs, they include the one that I was able to find. It's called the DataVideo DVK200. It's actually a chroma keyer, and it was used in video productions, but because it has a built-in time-based corrector, it expects a very stable, a very clean video image like one from a studio camera. Anyway, I don't understand all the details, but the bottom line is that I'm able to capture a 2-hour video and have either no dropped frames or very few, and the audio and the video are in sync at the end. So it's doing the job I needed to do. So that's the hardware part of this video. Now let's move on to talk about capture. All right, let's assume now that you have a Windows XP computer, either one that you built yourself or that you bought used. It's up and running. You found the drivers you needed for the ATI capture card or whatever other capture card. We now need to use software to capture that video feed from your VCR. The recommended software is called VirtualDub. It's free, and the version that we're going to be using and that we recommend, that Lord Smurf and the others recommend at DigitalFAQ, is version 1.9.11, and you can find a link to that software in the description. You can also find a link to the HuffYUV video codec, which you will also need. So follow the link. The instructions are there. I'm not going to go over it. Install it onto your WindowsXP machine. If you have a JVC SVHS player that has a time-based corrector, I'm going to go into settings and I'm going to show you how you can get the most out of it. So click menu, go down to VHS mode set, and over here on this screen there's a couple of ones to take note of. There's video calibration, and then on the next screen there is digital TBC, NR, and video stabilizer. So the best practice here, from what I understand, is that when you put a new tape in your VHS SVHS player, which you should do if you have video calibration, is turn it on temporarily. Let's go back to the main screen. I'm going to press play, and this is allowing the VHS player to figure out how your tape is set up and how it works, and it's calibrating it somehow. After a few seconds, I let it go for 10 or 20 seconds. You can stop the tape, or you can just simply go back into the menu and you can turn off video calibration. You don't need that on anymore now that it's been calibrated. And that's important because if you have it turned on, then picture control is set to auto, but if you have it turned off, then you have more control over the picture control. And there are a couple of settings here. There's 4 settings. There's normal, edit, soft, and sharp. My understanding is soft and sharp you can just ignore. It's not a good idea to use those. Normal means that the SVHS player will use the built-in digital stuff that is trying to clean up the picture. And the consensus seems to be, if you have one of these decks, they're really good and you should just use what is inside the deck. If for whatever reason you don't want to use it and you set it to edit, that's basically turning it into a regular SVHS player that doesn't have this feature. The video will look sharper. It may even look better on the screen initially. And if you think that you're going to be using Hybrid or Topaz Video AI or something, then you may be tempted to set this to edit. But again, this just comes from Lord Smurf and other experts on the site. The consensus, from my understanding, is it's better to keep it set to normal if you have this kind of VHS player. Going on to this screen now, there would be no reason to turn off the time-based corrector here, the Line time-based corrector, because that's one of the reasons why you would want to have a VHS player like this. The only reason, I suppose, is if something wonky was happening with the tape and turning it off actually made it better. I don't know if that would ever actually happen. Video stabilizer, I usually keep this off, but I think I read Lord Smurf say that in some cases it may be practical to use it. And there may be a case of a weird tape that's doing weird things. But in my experience, every time I use it, it moves around the image and I don't like the results. So that's what that is. So it's set correctly. And now what we're going to do is we're going to rewind the tape and start recording. All right, first step is in VirtualDub 1911. Head over to Capture AVI. You're now seeing what's coming off of the VHS player. And the first step is to go into Set Capture File. When you do this, you're telling the software what to name the file that you are going to save shortly. Next step is under the device menu, make sure that your USB device or your capture card is the one that is connected. should be, it should find it. In this case, it's the ATI Rage Theater video capture. That's the 9800 XT card. But if you're seeing stuff coming off your VHS player, then it's likely that this is set correctly and there's nothing to do here, and there's nothing to do there as well. Next step, under the video menu, if for some reason you don't see your video coming from your VHS player, it's possible that your video source is set incorrectly. So the first thing to do is make sure that your video source is set to either video composite, which is the yellow video cable, or video S-video, which is the S-video cable, depending which one you are using. Next step, if we head over to levels, by default, this is set, I believe, to 120 all the way down. There are sort of recommended levels for ATI cards, but what this does, let's just start up a video. What this does is it adjusts the way that the software is going to save the video that's coming off your capture card. And so obviously you can eyeball it and you could try to get to a place that you think looks the best, but this will depend on the settings on your screen. So I don't know if you can really trust your eyeballs in a case like this. I mean, obviously at the extreme, you can tell like what is good and what is bad. If I was to keep everything around the middle, that seems acceptable. You can really go far in trying to find the right level. And I'll show you how to do that. You can check the histogram. The histogram is going to give you a visual representation of it. But before doing that, I have to switch to preview mode. That's just a quirk of this ATI card. You might have to go to no display, depending on your card or USB capture device. I go preview, and now I can look at the histogram. And what the histogram is going to show me, yeah, this is sort of a little bit wonky here. So what the histogram is showing is a visual representation of the image. You see, you move it over to the left, that's what it looks like. Over to the right, what you want to do is try to keep it from clipping. Clipping means that you're losing either brightness or darkness, and so you want to keep it in the middle. You don't want to see red. If you see red, then you've gone too far. And this is what happens when you manipulate the contrast. It moves things over, it stretches things. So this is just giving you a visual representation of what your eyes are probably telling you. And so that seems to be acceptable. I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to leave it right there. All right, let's go back to the overlay. Let's turn off the histogram. Okay. All right, so we've done that, and just one final thing I'll tell you, if you really want to nerd out on this, and I think some people swear by this, before doing what we just did, looking at the histogram, what you should do is head over to cropping, and you're going to want to crop out the black that appears on the side here, and then the black that appears at the bottom. The reason you want to do that for the purpose of your histogram test or diagnostic is that you don't want this to throw off the figure. So we're just going to crop it away like that, and then what we would do is we would go back, do the histogram test again, and that should give you a more accurate reading on your true levels. But is it necessary? May not be, and it introduces one possible error to your workflow, because some people forget to turn off the cropping before they capture, and we don't want to do that, so let's get rid of that. Okay, so now we have our level set, and we made sure obviously the video source is correct. The final thing to look at in this menu is compression. You know what, I'm just going to go ahead and stop that tape. Under compression, this is telling a VirtualDub which of the codecs on your computer to use to record your AVI file. You should have already installed the HuffYUV codec. That's the recommended one for video capture. Also, Lagarith is one that's also commonly used. One or the other. I tend to use this one because it works, and I think this is the preferred one for most of the experts. So that's it under video. Under audio, we want to enable audio capture. If you don't do that, then you won't get any sound on your recording. Enable audio playback. I've read that this could cause a problem when you're recording. It may lead to drop frames or other things, so you can choose to leave this on or off, and you can experiment and see what works best for you. So that's all there is to say in audio. There's not much to do there. Under capture, there are two things to look at. First one is stop conditions. Stop conditions means that you're telling the software to stop the video capture after a certain number of seconds. So let's say that you have a 2-hour tape. You want to let it run, go do some other things, but you don't want to forget about it. Or if you do forget about it, then you want the video capture just to end after about 2 hours. And the only other thing to look at here is timing. Timing is by far the scariest and most controversial and most discussed screen in VirtualDub. It will either allow your video and audio to be in sync if you have problems with the hardware, or it will not, depending on what you choose here. The settings that are on the screen is what I believe to be the recommended expert opinion of people like Lord Smurf and others. You want the first two to be checked, because if you don't do that, then it won't give you an accurate reading on whether you had dropped frames or not. And you want it to tell you if you had dropped frames. It's not going to help stop the dropped frames necessarily, but it's going to tell you whether there were dropped frames. And that could be useful if you want, it may lead you to redo the capture. I believe sync audio to video by resampling. I believe this is the recommended setting in this area. And then finally, this check mark, automatically disable resync when integrated audio video capture detected. If you have a USB capture device, I believe this is what you should pick. In my case, I don't, or I'm not using it now, so I can choose to check or uncheck this. I'm just going to leave it there. And certainly go into the DigitalFAQ forums for lots and lots and lots of discussions about the capture timing options. That's about all we have to do here. The rest you can ignore. When you're ready to capture, you press either F5 or F6, I guess, or you might just use the drop down. And so I'm going to press play on the VCR. I'm going to start capturing the device. Now, the only other thing I want to talk about for VirtualDub are the dropped frames and the inserted frames. Over here on the right is your dashboard, and it's giving you a lot of data on how your capture is doing. And I think really the most important things are dropped frames and inserted frames. You say I have 2 of each. If I go through a 2-hour video and I only have 2, that is a huge success, right? That means that there wasn't any dropped frames, and I think what that translates to is that your audio and video will remain in sync, which is what you want. I think these dropped frames happen when I press the play button on the VHS player. But you can see for the rest of it, it's not giving me any more dropped frames or inserted frames. So that is a win. So I would continue playing this video till the end, and then I'd go to stop capture. And that's it. That's how to use VirtualDub to capture your video. And the next step is to take the AVI file that has been created and to bring it on over to in my case, I'm going to dump it onto an external hard drive because I'm on my XP computer. And then I'm going to take that hard drive, bring it up to my main modern computer, and I'm going to try to enhance the file by interlacing and doing some other things. And that's the next part of this video. Okay, first step to enhancing our video, we're going to bring our AVI file that we just captured into Hybrid. I'm going to drag and drop it into this space here under the Base tab. If we plan on doing some more enhancements to our video in another app afterwards, then we're going to export the video as a ProRes file. The file size is going to be much bigger, but this is a good format in order to preserve the original video file essentially as we bring it into another program. And in our case, we're going to bring it into DaVinci Resolve for color work. We're going to leave everything else as is. The default container is going to be MOV. We're not going to change the start and end times. In other words, we're not going to trim off the top or the end. And we're going to go over to the ProRes tab. Nothing to do here. In the crop tab, because it's a VHS sourced file, what I found is that turning on picture crop and setting the crop to 8, 8, and 14 works well for me. It removes what needs to remove. I like to resize the file or the video to 1080p. So I'm going to write 1080 in this field. Make sure auto adjust is on. The output par, if it is set to 17 by 15, then that, because of math, makes the final video file 1440 by 1080, which we want because it's sort of a standard size for this type of thing. So that's it for this screen. Under filtering, there are a couple of options to choose. I'm using the VaporSynth set of tools. The AVI synth is very similar. The layout of these screens is a bit different, but it's essentially the same. On the Deinterlace Telecine tab, it's very, very, very important that you make sure the top field first is set over here, and that QTGMC is set as the auto deinterlace handling tool. In this area, make sure that Bob is selected. What that's going to do, it's going to double your frame rate, and therefore it's not going to be throwing away any of the video information. The file size is going to be twice as big if you have this selected, but in theory, it's the kind of the best version of your video file because you're not throwing away any of the fields. The next step is to go to the VaporSynth tab. Head over to denoise. The thing that I found on VHS videotapes is that some combination of degrain, one of the degrain tools and the denoise tools will do a good job and are usually recommended. But the goal here is really just to keep it as simple as possible. So I'm going to suggest go to denoise, head to QTGMC. You may have to uncheck it and recheck it in order to get access to these boxes. And there are two settings here to play with. And when I say that, I mean that you're going to have to do some trial and error to see what looks best on the videotape source that you're using. Final temporal smoothing, you can set it to 1, 2, or 3, where 3 gives you the strongest result. It takes the video file and it removes noise, but it ends up making people look a bit plasticky and unnatural. Now I'm going to leave it at 3, which is a very high number, and I'm going to put easy denoise to 10, which is also a pretty high number, because I want to show you by pressing the preview button, and you can see like we've lost some detail now. We've definitely removed noise, but we've removed a lot of other stuff. And if you look at his sweater, it's hard to even see the detail of the knit. So that's too much. So let's bring down the final temporal smoothing to 1. We'll reduce denoise to, let's say, 5. And we'll try to see if we get something a little bit more natural looking. Because really the goal here is to improve it somewhat. Well, this is definitely better. Some of the detail is back. If you look in his sweater, we can now see the knit there where we couldn't before. In his face, we haven't lost too much detail. And now this really comes down to some personal preference. If you look at the wall over here, the desk, you can sort of see patterns of noise, and here it is definitely smoother. So it has had, I think, the impact we want. Let's just have a look at the computer screen. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the lines of the computer screen, there's some stuff going on here which is now looks a lot smoother and cleaner in this version. So if we were to stop there, I think that would be a win. Final temporal smoothing of 1. easy denoise of 5. But there is something we can try. If we head over to sharpen, and you can really try this with any of these sharpening tools. I'm going to use the CAS one. I'm going to make sure planes are set to Luma only. And now 1 is the highest you can do. I don't want to go as high as 1 because I'm pretty sure that's going to be way too much. So I'm going to try 0.2. And I'm going to, I think it's brought back some definition that was lost in the initial denoise. This black line might even be just a tad straighter, potentially a tad darker. And if we look at the computer monitor, let's just have a look at the black line around the screen. Yeah, hard to tell from the previous version, but I think I would go with this one because it adds just a little bit more to to make the image a little bit sharper after we lost some of that sharpness to the denoising. Yeah, here's a good example. Take a look at this line, whatever that is in the backdrop. And over here, you can see it's smoother. It's not all sort of ruggedy. So that's pretty good. So we did some denoising and we did some very, very minor sharpening in order to get it looking a little bit better. Can't expect too much from a VHS tape, but I think we've done our best for this one. In the Frame tab, the last thing to do is to go to Frame and then Resize. There's different, if you remember from an earlier screen, we told we told Hybrid that we want to upscale this to 1440 by 1080. And on this screen, you have the option of choosing a resizer. Now, the one I believe that is the recommended one that I think most people use is NNEDI 3. And then the settings on the screen here are, I believe, the correct settings. Neurons, I think, refers to how much of the surrounding area do you want the software to look at when it's making decisions about how to resize. So a bigger number is better. It takes more time, but if you have time, if you're going to run this while doing something else, then I think that's the setting that will get you the best result. GPU is signaling to Hybrid that you have a GPU that you want to use, and it will try to do these calculations on the GPU instead of your CPU. The only other thing I'll say about this is that I had experimented with real ESR GAN, and I'll show you what this looks like. And the one that I tried was the general one. What this does is it will disregard all the other denoising, degraining, halo, whatever you've done in the other ones. It will ignore it, and it's sort of like an all-in-one tool. The results, though, are very strong. In other words, if you remember when we went into denoise and we set a very high temporal smoothing and a denoise to 10, it gave us a very weird, unnatural look. Had we set the sharpening to 1, which is the highest, those 3 high numbers would have kind of replicated what this resizer does all in one by itself. That's all we're going to do in here. And the next step, once you're done, is, well, actually, I should just show you in the audio tab, going back to the top here. This should be fine. You shouldn't have to do anything here. If your audio is ahead or behind after your capture, then you can adjust it in this screen. I forget now if the audio is ahead. I'm not sure if you have to put a minus 100 milliseconds, or maybe it's plus 100 milliseconds. I always forget, and I always have to check my notes. But just know that that's there for you. But I think part of the problem is that if a video gets out of sync, it doesn't get out of sync at the beginning. It gets out of sync over time. So even if you try to change the AV delay, the audio video delay here, you may not get the result you want because it's going to apply to the whole video. It's not going to apply over time. That's all I'll say about this. Occasionally I've had errors when I first started using this that complain that if I'm making an MP4 file or some other codecs, that I can't use the audio format AAC. So just know that these are settings that can be changed depending on whether you get an error message when trying to render your video. Okay, that's it. We're going to not look at any of the rest of this. We're going to go back to the base, and we're going to press the job button over here. Okay, so as you can see, this is going to take a while to render or to convert, and by opening up the arrow over here, you get to see the different steps. Okay, for the final step, we're going to do some basic color correction in DaVinci Resolve. It's a free software. First step is to open it up and drag and drop in your MOV file. We're going to go ahead and change the frame rate so that it matches what we have in the MOV file. There is our file. We'll go down to the Edit tab, and we'll drag and drop our file into the timeline. Next step is we're going to head over to Effects. You can also click up here to get access to it. We're going to add an adjustment layer to the Video 2 timeline. And then we're going to drag it all the way across till the end of the video. The reason we're doing this is the color effects that we're going to apply will only be applied to the adjustment layer. They won't affect the bottom layer, and that way we can compare and see what the before and after really looks like. Okay. Next, let's find a frame that we're going to use as our. That's pretty good. We're going to go over to the color tab at the bottom. Okay, so make sure Apple ProRes is selected over here. This is the timeline number 1, and we'll just find a random scene that sort of is representative. We'll use this one, and we'll go ahead and under the color wheel tab, we'll press auto balance. Okay, so you can see that the node over here, which is sort of like a layer, has a little A next to it. That shows that it's been adjusted with auto color. Now, what we have to do is right click, grab still. This is now, it's not that you're grabbing a still image, it's that you're grabbing the settings that made the still image. We're now going to go ahead and copy that by doing Control-C. We're going to go over to our adjustment layer. We're going to do Control-P, and now the adjustment layer has the same settings. We're now going to go back to the original layer. We're going to right click on top of the node. We're going to say reset node. Okay, so all that's done is that we now have an adjustment layer that has these automatic or auto color settings, and we have a layer 1 which doesn't. If you go back to edit, you can see how this works in practice. So over here is our adjustment layer. We can turn it off and on, and in doing so you can see what the effect is of the color change. If we don't like the color change, then we can go back to the color tab and we can adjust it a little bit. So why don't we do that? Go back to color. We're on our adjustment clip, and we have a sort of a preview, and working with, let's see, we'll find this. Working with this, we're going to, I think, lower the contrast. And maybe some of the saturation as well. right? And I'm looking at the scopes on the right side over here. We want to make sure that it doesn't go above the top line or below the bottom line. So we're just going to manually adjust that. Right, we're taking the work that the software did, but we're going to adjust it. All right, I think that looks safe. Now, if we go back to Edit and we turn the adjustment layer on and off, you can see that the change is now more subtle. And I think this is good. It's a minor change, but that's probably all this video needs. Okay, final step. In the Deliver tab, we want to make sure that, well, let's give this a name. The format, we're going to export it as an MP4 file with an H.264 codec, because we're ready to upload it to YouTube and to save it on our computer as sort of a final distribution version. The resolution we're going to set to 940 by 720 because that was the resolution of the video file as it came out of Hybrid. And we're going to make sure that the frame rate remains at 5994. We're going to leave everything else the same. We're going to press Add to Render Queue. It appears over here on the right, and then we have to press the Render All button to begin the rendering of the file.